Okay, good morning, everyone. We are 9 o'clock sharp. Welcome to this section, and you are in the fire room. I'm Imo, the atsec CEO and Managing Director at US Corp. It's my honor to introduce the first speaker of this session, Chris Brych from Oracle. And I would encourage you to read his very impressive biography online at the conference website. But one thing he did not mention in that biography, and I feel like it's worth mentioning, he won a crypto game 1 year. If I remember correctly, it was 2018. It was so impressive that absolutely a proof that how knowledgeable he is in the field of FIPS validation. He has 20 years, more than 20 years of the experience, doing that. But I do really invite you to read very impressive bio online. And he's going to talk about making sense of FIPS 140 validation review queue. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Yi. Before I get into my presentation, I just wanted to let everyone know that this is sort of a special anniversary for me in many ways, in that it was 2 years ago, immediately upon returning from the ICMC conference in Virginia, that I got diagnosed with a very rare form of leukemia, which is blood cancer. And I'm happy to say that after 2 years that I'm in remission, and I'm happy to be here to present to you today. So to get into my presentation, I just want to give you first a little bit of background on the FIPS 140 validation queue. So first of all, what is the FIPS 140 validation queue? And it's basically made up of two components, the implementation under test list, which are modules which are at a test laboratory that have been submitted by a vendor to a test laboratory for testing, and a modules and process list, which assumes that the module has completed testing by a laboratory and the report has been submitted to the CMVP for certification. So I should mention that there's criteria for getting listed on both lists. So the criteria for getting on the IUT list includes, a vendor must be under contract with the cryptographic module test lab to perform the FIPS 140 validation testing. The cryptographic module and documentation must be submitted to the CST lab. And participation on the IUT list is voluntary in that it's by default that you get added to the IUT list, and if you don't want to get listed, you have to opt out. You have to let the lab know and to let the CMVP know that not to post your module as being under test. There's also criteria for getting listed on the modules and process list, in which the criteria include the CST lab has completed validation testing and submitted a set of documented evidence to the CMVP, and that normally includes a validation test report and a security policy, non-proprietary security policy. And the CST lab must provide a letter to the cryptographic module validation program stating recommendation for the validation of the cryptographic module. So my presentation is going to be mostly focusing on the modules and process list, which I have highlighted in red in the box below. So now I'll talk a little bit about the IUT list and the modules and process list. So what I've tried to do here is create a little snapshot of what the IUT list and what the modules and process list looks like on the CMVP website. So as you can see, we have on the IUT list, it lists the module name, the vendor name, the standard for which it's being tested against, and the IUT date. And the IUT date is the date at which the lab submits a request to the CMVP to let them know that they started testing on a specific module from a vendor. Then on the modules and process list looks very similar to the IUT list in that it also lists the module name, the vendor name, the standard, and the status. So within the status, there are 4 stages as part of the review process within the CMVP. The first being review pending, meaning that the module has completed testing and the lab has submitted a test report for validation. There's from there, it transitions to the in-review stage, which assumes that the module has been assigned to CMVP reviewers in order to review the test report. Then the third stage is the coordination stage, which is an iterative stage where the CMVP have completed comments and submitted to the lab. And the lab then has to, submit various iterations back and forth to the CMVP to resolve all those comments. And then finally is the finalization stage. So when all the comments have been resolved, it transitions to the finalization stage, which means that the CMVP will issue a validation certificate for the module. Now, of interest here, I've listed some dates here, where a review pending is in June and the module is being certified in September. Ideally, this is where we would like to be, to have like a 3-month review queue, but however, we're not there yet. But we're making some progress, and I want to focus my presentation on that. I should also mention, too, that there's criteria for being maintained on both of those lists. For the IUT list, the testing must be completed within an 18-month period or risk being removed from the IUT list. And for the modules in process list, the module validation must be completed and cannot exceed 24 months after transitioning to in-review. So basically, when the module gets in review, the clock starts ticking, and the lab and the CMVP have 24 months to complete the validation. If it's not completed within 24 months, it gets kicked back to IUT. So in the bottom there, I show a little timeline which shows the various stages of the module transitions as part of the process. So, what contributed to the long review queue? So what I tried to do here was take a snapshot of what the CMVP workload was in 2020, which was just previous to the Secretary of Commerce signing FIPS 140-3 as a recognized standard. So, at the beginning of 2020, there was around 68 modules in January that was in the IUT list, 204 modules in the modules in process list, which, although it went down for the first month of 2020, it's continued to grow up. I mean, it grew to 215 at the end of March. At the end of June, it was at 234. At the end of September, it was at 287. And in Q4, or before the end of the year, it did reach above 350 modules, but it did come down to 339 before the end of the year. But the frustrating part was that, if you see the green line on the bottom, there was only on average of 4 modules being certified. So the CMVP were really, treading water here. They weren't making a lot of progress on the queue. Now, I should also caveat this by saying in the following year, in 2021, they did make some progress early in the year, but then the queue started to go back up again. But I didn't want to focus much on that. So now I want to talk about, some events that contributed to the long review queue. So in September of 2019, the Secretary of Commerce signed off on the standard, the FIPS 140-3 standard, making it a standard which you could test to. However, at the time, there was no infrastructure in place to actually submit test reports. So there was a lot of work that had to happen in order to do that. Which brings us to, the next date. The next major date was in September of 2020, where the CMVP announces, has the capability to accept 140-3, validation submissions. Now, although this date did not, impact the queue too much, it did mark, it has some importance in that it marked the start of the transition of 140-2 to 140-3. Then in January of 2021, we were thrown a bit of a curveball where the CMVP mandated full compliance of 56AR3, and this was sort of right in the middle of the transition. And vendors had to scramble in order to get their modules to be compliant with the 56AR3 key agreement transition, or else risk being their modules being transitioned to the historical list, meaning that they wouldn't be able to sell to the U.S. government, or U.S. procurement agencies wouldn't be able to buy those modules. So it was a huge risk for vendors. So vendors were scrambling in order to get those modules submitted and validated before the end of the transition period. So in September of 2021, the transition period came. However, the CMVP extended it for an extra 6 months to allow vendors to complete their validations under 140-2. And then in April of 2022, the transition period ended, and we can only submit to 140-3. So now I want to try to give my own thoughts around, explaining the FIPS queue. And, for starters, I mean, once the standard was signed in 2019, I mean, there was a short time to prepare for FIPS 140-3. There was a lot of work that had to be done, which included a huge ramp up, specifically for the CMVP. I mean, they had to develop CMVP submission scenarios, and this is to submit validation test reports, you know, for non-security relevant changes to those scenarios, for CVEs. There was a lot more. I mean, so there was a lot of work that was needed in order to prepare for those, you know, modules to be submitted under those circumstances. You also had the porting of FIPS 140-2 IGs, you know, to either the FIPS 140-3 management manual or to, you know, new FIPS 140-3 IGs to maintain consistency in transition between the two programs. You know, there's also, you know, development of testing material. You know, the CMVP qualify lab testers, or CMVP have a policy where lab testers should be qualified in order to test a 140-3. So in order to do that, they need to create material in order to give to the peer review group to manage those tests. So I mean, again, that took up some of their time. Also, there was the new web cryptic tool. I mean, this was a tool that was brought on to help expedite the validation review process. And then with that was the security policy generation tool, which is generated based on the inputs of the validation test reports. So this helped in creating, you know, efficiencies in the validation test report. So these things took some time in order to, you know, to get in place. Also, I mean, reviewing of the test reports were taking a lot longer because FIPS 140-3, you know, was a new standard. There was more requirements. And from a lab perspective, you know, they were coming into this fairly green in that, you know, they didn't know the level of detail required in the validation reports to satisfy the CMVP's requirements. You know, and that resulted in, you know, more iterations needed to finalize the validation test reports because they were continuously going back and forth, you know, and getting the necessary detail in order to satisfy the CMVP in order to validate these modules. Also, I mean, you have CMVP staff turnover, reassignment. I mean, as people move on, I mean, they have to bring on more people and train more people, and these things take time. There was also the CMVP split reviewers to focus on, you know, FIPS 140-2 reports and FIPS 140-3 reports. I mean, so they created two queues, and I think the emphasis there was on getting rid of the FIPS 140-2 queue, you know, and FIPS 140-3, although they were continuing to validate or to, you know, review those reports, you know, it left a larger FIPS 140-3 review queue, which we're dealing with right now. And then finally, I mean, the CMVP lab audit to support NVLAP. I mean, right now, there are over 20 labs out there that need to be reaccredited every 2 years. So, you know, the CMVP are responsible for going on site to visit the labs and review their quality processes to make sure that the labs are doing their part in doing the necessary validation testing, and also have the quality process in place to make sure they're producing quality reports. So, I mean, all of these things take time. I mean, and it also takes away from them being able to review the test queue or to get rid of the models and process list. So, you know, recently, like, you know, how has the CMVP tried to address the backlog? You know, for starters, I mean, there was the formation of the cryptographic module user form implementation guidance working group, which was started in June of 2023. And this was a group based out of the CMUF that, you know, was a voluntary group that came together made up of vendors, labs, and the CMVP to help formulate, you know, requests for guidances. And what this does is allows for vendor input, because vendors are the subject matter experts in the technology, you know, and they can help and it makes better use of the CMVP time, because they're not the ones that have to research this every time a new request for guidance comes in, and it was taking an excessive amount of time to resolve. An example of how it's actually made better use of the time is, you know, one of the first request for guidance that came out was the applicability of operational bypass test requirements, applicability of pre-operational bypass test requests for guidance. And this was one of the first ones we worked on, and you know, it took, I think it was 3 or 4 calls in order to finally resolve, you know, come to an agreement on the guidance. But it just showed the collaboration between, you know, industry and NIST and the labs, you know, to work together to come to a guidance that was, you know, acceptable for all. There's also, you know, the CMVP checklist, I think, which came out sometime last year. And this was a checklist the CMVP put together to help labs better perform checks and balances on their test reports to improve the quality of the test reports, because initially the quality of the test reports, from what I hear, wasn't the greatest, and they were trying to help the labs perform better test reports such that it makes it easier to review. There's also the interim validations, and this is a very, very new process which seemed to have a lot of popularity more recently because it's actually helped with the validation queue. And this interim validation queue is a process where the CMVP temporarily fast-tracks a module's validation based on meeting consistency checks, in the validation test report and in the security policy done by Web Cryptic and the VR1 security policy tool. Should mention that the interim validations were only applicable for modules that were submitted before 2024, so only 2023 and before. The process started in June 3rd of this year. The interim validation cert is only valid for 2 years, and it's only meant as a temporary fix. It's only applicable until October of 2024 if vendors want to apply to get certified under the interim validation program. So next I want to focus on some accomplishments, that the CMVP has made, in the recent review statistics. So this graph here shows I've tracked implementations under test, which average around, I think, was 3.5 modules per week being added to the list, and this is only since June the 3rd. The modules in process list, which had on average about 4.1 module status changes per week. And the big change, which I want to focus on, is that there was an average of 6.4 modules certified per week since June 3rd, since this process was taking place. And this is the first time in a long time where the CMVP has actually been able to make progress and traction on the review queue. So this next graph just gives a little breakdown of the modules which have received full validation since June the 3rd, and the ones that have received interim validation. The interim validations being in yellow, and the green validations being full validations. So other considerations for reducing the review's queue size, and these are more of my ideas as to how they could have reduced the queue size. For starters, the CMP could have delayed the rollout of 800-56A AR key agreement. It was in the middle of the FIPS 140-2 to 140-3 transition, and it caused caused vendors to submit a lot of extra modules in order to avoid their modules being transitioned to the historical site. Also, they could focus on, completing test reports that are in the coordination phase. These modules have already gone through an extensive review. We can almost see the finish line. If we can just dot the I's, cross the T's, and get those modules through the validation process, assuming they're validatable, it will greatly help in reducing that queue to get those, out of the queue altogether. Next, have the CMVP review focus on criteria for meeting the FIPS requirements. I've heard through the grapevine that a lot of the comments were coming back were either non-security relevant or had no bearing on whether the module will meet the FIPS requirements. So if we focus on those comments that address specifically whether a module is FIPSable, that would hopefully help reduce the amount of comments and help the modules get through the process quicker. Also, there's the NIST automation validation tool, which is a project that's in development, being led by the NCCOE to automate the validation review. And I'm excited about this because I think that if we had this tool in production, it would greatly help streamline the review process at NIST. And then finally, trust the labs. The labs testing results for level 1 modules. To start with. I've been with the program for almost 25 years now, and in my 25 years, I've only seen maybe less than a handful of modules that were ever revoked for, not conforming to the FIPS 140 standard. So the labs, in part, are doing their job. Consider, random selection of test reports to review based on lab proficiency. So the labs who are, provide better quality validation reports will get less oversight. Delinquent labs who submit poor validation reports should be dealt with by MVLab, which is what MVLab is there for, is to make sure that the lab is providing quality test reports and quality testing to make sure these modules are validated. Now, this proposal was suggested by a trade association. I believe it was ITI about 4 or 5 years ago, but it was rejected. But it would be worthwhile considering again. Finally, next steps, my recommendations. Again, CMVP should continue to focus on clearing the modules and coordination. These modules again have gone through an extensive review and we're near the finish line. Just let's focus our energies in reducing the coordination queue such that we can focus on, getting new modules in review and clearing the queue. Also, extend interim validations past October. I mean, right now, from what I understand, there's about 180 modules that are in the queue right now in 2024 because they didn't qualify for the interim validation. And the advantage here is that, more modules are going to be certified with a smaller CMVP queue if we extend it. The disadvantage is that the CMVP will need to, complete the full validation, removing the interim caveat. But, I mean, I think if we can extend this interim validation until, the automation tools come into play, it would definitely help in, getting more product out there that, and benefit the vendors and getting our stakeholders and government, better tools in order to provide additional security for their networks. And finally, hire more staff. I know it's easy for me to say hire more staff when I don't control the purse strings, but it's an option. I mean, we are contributing to, paying for them to review it. But anyway, it's just a suggestion. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Hi, Chris. Oops, sorry. Is there someone? It's on? Okay. Hello, Chris. Thank you. Great talk. I really appreciate the update on the queue. I have a fuzzy memory, which you'll probably have a better memory of. A few years ago, folks from NIST talking about having hired a lot of contractors to get that queue down. And it sounds like with the transition, what you're saying with the transition to -3, and then those contractors probably rolling off, now the queue is back. We had also talked a long time ago, and I wondered if you remember where this was, about like trusted vendors or maybe modules that are only getting updates, getting maybe less review or a faster review process as well. Maybe vendors who have brought through a certain version of their software or hardware multiple times, a minor update could have a shorter review, or just with the lab. Do you remember that discussion and know where that might have gone to?
It did come up, and it actually came up again this year. I mean, actually, it was yesterday, I believe, at one of the presentations. We talked about ways in which we can create efficiencies, in the validation process. And one of them is for similar technologies. I mean, as an example, OpenSSL has been certified how many millions of times, and specifically on Linux, various Linux distributions, and these modules are basically mostly the same thing. If you look at each security policy from each different vendor, they're almost identical, right? So there can be some efficiencies there. So assuming, the vendors, the only thing that's basically different for the most part is just the versioning. But a lot of the algorithms are the same. So if we can create some efficiencies where, if you compare one vendor to another and the algorithms are identical, it shouldn't need to go through an extensive review cycle.
The slides where you show the trend over 4 years, does that include the interim validations that have been issued recently?
Yes, this might I'll just go back to this graph right here.
No, the previous one over the last 4 years.
Oh, actually, if I go back to
this one
here, this was only a snapshot of 2020. So back then we didn't have interim validations. It was only full validations
this is
at the
just
time.
2020. Okay, sorry, my bad. I thought it was the last 4 years.
No. This was just 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we know if the trend is going down?
So I mean, in 2021, it did go down a little bit, but then it went back up again, and really it never recovered since then.
Okay.
But I wanted to focus my presentation on more the accomplishments we've made over the last 3 or 4 months versus. I even considered using some of Alicia Squire's data, but I mean, that doesn't really paint a really good picture from the beginning of this year and in previous years. So I wanted to create a positive environment here, to basically applaud the accomplishments that we made in the short term.
Thanks.
while the CMVP is clearly trying to make progress, lowering the queue, I see a problem with the interim validation, which I didn't realize when I went into it. I mean, we went in July, got our interim this week. Problem now is I have no upgrade path. I can't do update, I can't do BR1. The queue's just gonna explode again, unless there's a non-security relevant update path for interims. When
No.
BR1 process is opened up, it's just gonna explode again.
I get it. I mean, the only other alternative is to submit it as a new validation. Right? Even though it's the same technology, I mean, although it's...
I don't see how this is gonna help.
I agree, right? But at the same time, I mean, I know you've got to continue to provide security updates to your product, and you know, until the CMVP gets through those interim, you know, modules. I agree. I mean, it's a trade-off. I mean, it's either, you know, we get modules certified, pushed out the door, versus, you know, and then having to wait a little bit. And if you desperately need to get another validation done, I think maybe your only option is to submit it as a brand new validation again, which, you know, and then possibly that'll qualify for an interim validation, and then you can get your product validated sooner. I mean, because we don't have many options right now, right? So, you know, until the queue gets down, I mean, that's where we are. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Is there a time frame for the automated tool, or is it in a very nascent stage?
It's on the next session. They're talking about it. They're going to provide an update.
I didn't see that. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. Hi, Chris. Thanks for presenting. Could you go back to your events timeline? I wanted to add one. Yeah. So November 7th, 2020 was the transition date where we started requiring conformance to 890B. So that impacted us quite a bit in a couple ways. One is we had a large number of submissions right before that transition date.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we had to start, you know, reviewing for conformance to 90B. But just wanted to add that one. Yeah, I remember November 7th, 2020.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and you know, rightly so.
date that
I
is
think
stuck
you
in
didn't understand, or you know, maybe understand the impact of how that ripple effect, you know, is going to, you know, be presented by vendors, because vendors were scrambling. I mean, there were some vendors that did, you know, transition to 56A, but there were a lot that did not, and there was a scare by a lot of vendors that they were afraid that their module was going to transition to historical status if they didn't complete those validations. So they really needed to climb on board and make sure that their modules, you know, were able to get extended at least till 2026, when all modules are going to be sunset, or FIPS 140-2 modules are going to be sunset.
Yeah, just to
Hi,
follow
Chris.
up on that, if you go back to the 2020 graph,
2020.
uh,
Oh, yeah.
that spike on the right is exactly November 7th, 2020. So
Okay. Cool. Any more? Thank you, everyone, for having me.
Discussion NCCOE automation of module validation program. And I'm going to hand over to the panel leader, Courtney.
Yes, hello, thank you everyone. So the NIST Cybersecurity Center of Excellence has undertaken the Automated Cryptographic Module Validation Project, or ACMVP, to support improvement in the efficiency and timeliness of CMVP operations and processes. So, as we have observed in the previous session and other sessions, the challenge that we have with CMVP is there is a lot of manual elements. So this project is aiming to achieve automation where possible. We really want to support process improvement and efficiencies. So I'm Courtney Mata, I represent AWS. I'm also supporting as the ACMVP PM. Here with us today are key individuals leading the effort, and they have significantly contributed contributed to this effort. So please welcome Chris Seeley, our ACMVP project lead, Alex Kalis, our ACMVP technical lead. They're both with NIST. And then we have Stefan Mueller, our developer and consultant with atsec, Walker Riley, our protocol design and development with atsec, Barry Fussell, ACMVP developer and principal engineer, Cisco, which actually Barry has a counterpart here, Andrew, who filled in, and he will be presenting for us today instead of Barry, but they're both key individuals with the effort. And then we have Raul Gabriel, so he is representing the infrastructure track with MITRE. So actually, Raul, let's start with you if we want to kind of run through a certain role and if you'd like to summarize the role and also your work stream in particular.
Good morning. Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm Raul Gabriel, I'm with MITRE, and I've been with the NCCOA for the last 4 years. At the NCCOA, I oversee the IT infrastructure and cybersecurity operations. So with regard to this project, I work closely with AWS, the NIST federal network infrastructure and security teams, the NCCOA IT operations team, and the CMVP production infrastructure team to, one, design and deploy this AWS research cloud that's going to support, or has been supporting, the CMVP automation research. This cloud is an extension of the on-premises private cloud connected via Direct Connect through NOAA nWave. And again, it's an extension of the on-premise cloud, so it's subject to the same security policies and controls. Our approach has been to collaborate with the production CMVP team to replicate the production environment within this research cloud for the project team to begin the research and that automation research. Some of the artifacts of that effort include documents that showcase how the various AWS services utilize map back to NIST best practice guidance, so 853 and 92, for example, to ensure that we're following on guidance and so on. Currently, the effort is on modernization opportunities for the CMVP infrastructure. So not only do we want to modernize the application, we also want to make sure that it's deployed in a modern infrastructure. So we've been decoupling the supporting infrastructure and applications, looking at a mapping to what cloud-native services would look like, including containerization for portability and scalability, serverless for operational efficiencies. So our goal is to pilot a modern infrastructure, document the findings so that the CMVP leadership can make an informed decision as to how they want to proceed with modernizing their production infrastructure.
Excellent. So also I want to talk to Chris here. So Chris, if you can introduce and talk more on ACMVP for us and your overall role.
Sure. So many of you know I'm Chris Seeley. Previously, Apostle had started this project and had been running this project through the NCCOE. This past year, I took it over. We had a lot of success automating algorithm validations and entropy source validations, and so I'm taking a lot of that experience over here towards module validations as a result, though this problem is probably significantly harder than the previous ones. My responsibility on this project is, among management, is looking at the server development. So these are the tools and applications that we will host within the CMVP infrastructure that Raul mentioned to collect data and perform as much of the automation of these validations as possible. My primary focus here is to ensure that what comes out of this project is something the CMVP can adopt as quickly as possible and help reduce the transition time to a project like this down to as soon as possible, because that's what our immediate need is.
Awesome. Alex, tell us also about the technical side.
Sure. So, hello everybody. I'm Alex Kalis. I'm part of the TE, the test evidence work stream. It's one of the different work streams, as you mentioned. Raul mentioned the other one, and Chris has, I think, mentioned the protocol one. But essentially the TE work stream, from a very high level, just kind of looks at, what areas of the, FIPS 140-3 validation process there can be room for efficiencies and improvements, and looking at ways of, considering automation in the process. I am the co-chair of the work stream, but the other co-chair would be Emao from atsec, who's undoubtedly done, the king size portion of the work from the perspective of co-chairing the work stream. So very much appreciated for all the work that she's done for the project and for the work stream specifically, as well as the other collaborators of the work stream. There's other CSTL labs, so testing labs. There's vendors. There's NCCOE folks as well. So a lot of collaboration, a lot of input and feedback from the group, with a common goal of finding ways of of efficiencies and trying to think about how we can incorporate that into the CMVP process sooner rather than later.
Awesome. And Walker.
Hi, I'm Walker Riley with atsec. I've been with atsec for about 5 years now, and I've been working on and with the web cryptic tool as it's been developed, and recently made the transition to the BR1 format. And I have been trying to utilize that experience both on the web cryptic side and from writing reports and security policies to help kind of leverage that towards assisting the TE work stream in both classification of the TE as well as codifying that into a format that is usable by our tool, and kind of being a liaison between the TE work stream and the evidence submission protocol work stream.
Awesome. And I'm going to kick to Andrew, too, to give a quick summary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Karcher. As Courtney mentioned, I'm standing in for Barry today, who was unfortunately unable to make it. I'm mostly a software engineer helping deal with client development and some technical details on the protocol side and fleshing it out to make sure it's as good as it can be. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, so Alex, we recently reflected as a team during a hackathon last month on our accomplishments. So, what are some key activities going on with the TU work stream, and in general, would love to hear more.
Sure. So, as you can see here on the slide, there's there's 3 accomplishments that kind of summarize the work that's been done up to this point from the TE work stream. First one, classifying TEs is a very small screen there, but classifying TEs and filtering assertions and structuring data. So those are the 3 main areas. I can kind of go into them a little bit right now, kind of explain the thought around that and how it could help our processes and where we think these things can fit into improvement. So as far as classifying TEs go, there's over 550 TEs. So TEs is a test evidence. It's where labs basically look at the test requirements of the FIPS 140-3 standard, and they fill in their evidence on how they've tested the module to meet that specific requirement. So that's what the TE represents. And we've classified as part of this work those TEs, those 550 plus TEs, into these 4 categories: security policy, other documentation, secure source code, as well as functional testing, which means basically for example, the security policy tests, TEs would be, the TEs that the lab would be able to, review the information from the security policy. The information would be present in the security policy because it's a requirement for the security policy, and that TE should be able to, reference the security policy and be able to, provide, essentially that information is already provided as part of the security policy requirement. And other documentation is an example of some TEs that a lab would look at other vendor documentation such as design documentation, user guides, other pieces of the final state model, other things that would be necessary for this validation. So source code TEs, those are ones that obviously the lab would look at the actual module source code. I heard yesterday that the CC evaluation doesn't typically look at source code. Maybe I misunderstood that, but I thought that interesting sort of just differences between FIPS and CC, that there is some requirements that specifically ask for a source code review, and then just in general, obviously the lab has the source code and looking at the module and understanding how it meets the requirements. And then functional testing TEs are the lion's share of assurance, where essentially the lab is exercising the module in some capacity to demonstrate how the module is meeting the test requirement. So classifying those TEs into those different categories, as well as some combination of those at times, was a important effort to understanding how to test those test requirements and look at ways of further developing test methods associated with test requirements, and kind of ironing out some of the structure behind what information is necessary to provide to the CMVP regarding those different areas, which leads into the other couple things, and I don't want to take too much time, but the filtering of assertions and TEs and VEs being the vendor evidence assertion, AS being assertion. Essentially, they're all in scope of the overall requirements of the FIPS standard, and essentially the idea is with the work that's been done already is looking at those TEs and looking at the module specific specifications and characteristics, such as it's a software module, hardware module, it's level 1, level 3, whatever. It includes degraded mode of operation, or it has or does not have a bypass mode. To basically just different characteristics of the module that can filter down the TEs that are the set of TEs that are necessary for the lab to test that specific module, assuming its characteristics and specifications. So, tagging each TE with different filtering options gives that important ability to filter things down, so that we're not looking at unnecessary TEs, like you said, 550 of them or so. So, let's say you filter them down to 300 or so, that's already some level of, efficiencies that are gained from the lab side, as well as eventually the reviewer side as they're looking through these reports.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so that's really good context. And that has been a big effort, is classifying these TEs, over 550, ignore the explanation, but it's really just emphasizing that significance, that really does reduce the ambiguity, like he touched on, and supports filtering and other activities that are really key to helping improve process around. So really appreciate you elaborating. Chris, I'm going to kick to you next on our future outlook for this program or project for automation. What do you have for deliverables for us this month? And then what are we looking at future scope?
Yeah, so today we have 2 clients that'll be going through a demo with our server that's set up in the NCCOE environment. That'll be Andrew and Stefan in a moment here. But I want to talk to some of the elements that were completed over the past year and implemented on the server. One of the things Alex had talked about was TE applicability and filtering, and I want to talk specifically about what this looks like. Essentially, when you define your module, you'll answer about 30 yes or no questions about the capabilities of the module. You'll provide the security strengths and embodiment of the module, and that allows our server to tell you exactly which TEs we expect you to provide evidence for, and that is nice in 2 ways. There is no ambiguity on whether or not you need to meet a certain requirement, and 2, we can ensure completeness that every TE has been addressed at the time you submit the module to the CMVP. The hope here is that this reduces questions, comments, reviewers that are searching for requirements that they expect to be met, but were not met. And so that functionality has been implemented in our server. It might not be highlighted during the demo, but is a very nice takeaway from this project so far. The other is the work that we've done on the test evidence submission format. So many of you are familiar with the nice document that can be several hundred pages long that goes through each individual TE and provides the evidence into the CMVP. We've converted this into a JSON format that lets you specifically address a TE or a group of TEs at once by providing the evidence associated with it. And this allows us to do some more interesting things and open the door for automation. If we can define things like appropriate test methods for individual TEs, that means the server can ask very specific questions on those TEs or expect certain fields to be present in the submission from the lab. And this takes work off of the reviewer in terms of determining whether a test was applicable or determining whether or not the justification, meets the requirements of the TE. So a lot of the thought process that a reviewer goes through when looking at a piece of evidence for a TE is taken off of their plate, and they can focus on the results of the test. Over the next year, there are some things that we would like to work on. I know that next ICMC is going to be in April of 2025, so our year has been maybe reduced to 6 months, but nonetheless, we're going to push forward. We are going to look at what we call testing recommendations, which are those test methods that I alluded to. We're going to look at moving the comment rounds into the API itself, so getting things out of Word documents and into an API format, getting things out of PGP encryption or Box and into the same authentication system that's used already on ACVTS and ESV. We're interested in what this looks like and what this allows a reviewer to do. This opens the door for things like comments that, not necessarily waiting for a full set of comments to go back and forth between the lab. This opens the door for responding to, individual comments at a time and leaving time for some of the harder comments to, for the lab to work on those comments over a longer period of time, but still make progress on the module and the submission. I think this is helpful for the reviewers because it stays fresh in their minds for a better period of time. But we're interested in looking at what this would look like in our infrastructure and seeing what improvements we can gain from this. Additionally, many of you are familiar with Web Cryptic. We're interested in looking at how Web Cryptic can fit into this platform. Of course, nobody wants to sit down and write 100 pages of JSON. So looking at Web Cryptic to kind of streamline that process, Dave and the team has worked well to put that up in the first place. We would look at how we can take that data and format it into the JSON we're expecting so that the submission process for the lab is as close to what you are familiar with as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, and so we're really looking forward to showcasing this demo. Of course, with automation, it's really nice to see it in action, right? So I'm going to welcome Andrew and Stefan to give a two-part series here. And kicking things off, maybe I'll just start the recording here, and we'll showcase the first piece of what is the automated security policy generation. So let me cut to that in this machine if you guys give me a couple minutes. Here you go, Stefan.
So before we start that, just some brief context. LibAMVP is a client that we are developing to be sort of an example implementation. Not so much having a nice front end or anything like that, but just parsing JSON and sending it back and forth to the server to serve as an example that other people can use as they are developing their own tools and stuff like that. So this recording showcases what we have so far. This was recorded earlier this week, and let us know at the end if you have any questions about it. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to this demo of one of the clients for the NCCOE CMVP automation project called LibAMVP. We will go through the existing current flow of the protocol, starting with module creation and ending with getting a certificate number and a security policy PDF. Before we start, there are some brief disclaimers. All data shown is for example purposes only. In addition, all data formats, including payloads, are still under development. Finally, this demo is not intended to cover the contents of TE submissions or the logistics around that data. The first thing we need to do is create a module listing on the AMVP server for the module we wish to certify. This entails sending a JSON payload containing the name, description, and many other basic pieces of information about the module. We do this with a simple command seen here. The server will take a moment to process that request. In the meantime, here's a quick look at what the module JSON we just sent looks like for context.
So these are the.
Now we check to see if the module request has been approved. It has, and we have been given an ID number for the module. The next step is to request certification on this module. This involves sending a request to the server including the module ID, vendor ID, CMV contact ID, and optionally any ACV or ESV certificate IDs we want to link to this certification. After a few moments, the server has generated a list of requirements, TEs required based on the information we sent about the module, and a list of required security policy sections. We can submit the TE and security policy info in any order, and either in pieces or all at once. For this demo, we will submit all of the TE responses at once, and then all of the security policy sections at once. First, we will submit the TE data with a command and see that the server accepts it. The server indicates that all expected evidence has been submitted and is now waiting for the rest of the security policy information. The TE data is currently just a placeholder, but you can see the JSON allows us to specify different blocks of data for different TEs and allows us to group them or separate them as much as we want to. The security policy JSON data looks similar to what is expected for newer formats. It's just in plain JSON. We are also able to include graphics encoded in base 64. You can see we have done that with the company logo for the front of the PDF. Now we submit that security policy information with a command. The server is going to accept this submission, say that all required data has been submitted, and then process our request and eventually award us with a certification number. Finally, we can get to the security policy PDF. This can be done before you certify the module, as long as all needed security policy sections have been submitted. Using a single command, we download it and save it to a file. The server has generated a PDF from the information that we have submitted, and will be able to generate a consistently formatted document for any submitted module. Thanks for watching, and please feel free to reach out to any members of the project if you have further questions.
Awesome, that
Hello,
concludes. Oh.
and welcome to this demo of one of the clients for this.
We just wanted you to watch it again. Okay, great, guys. Yeah, no, I wanted to actually dedicate a couple minutes to further introducing Stefan. He's a key member of the team as well, who's doing this next demo. Stefan, if you want to just provide a summary of your development role, because he's been leading this large work stream as well. Give a couple minutes before we kick off your demo. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Courtney. So my name is Stefan Müller. I'm working for atsec. I am just on the client development side, just like Andrew. I'm developing such a client for atsec for the lab usage. And since my history is also in the development of a client for ACVP as well as for ESV, my goal is for us, for the lab, to provide an integrated tool that can be used to also automate our work as much as possible, so that we don't have repetitive work, that we don't have that we don't need to think about where information is stored, that if we have to provide information twice in different locations, that there are no inconsistencies. That is the main motivation for us, for atsec, to develop such a tool, to support also the work here, basically to make our life easier and faster. And with that, basically, I'm just simply repeating what Andrew just showed us with his demo, but this time it's truly live. So therefore, of course, everything can go wrong, as we always know that. That said, I'm not focusing too much on the individual steps because these individual steps are identical, but I would like to also give a little bit of a background where we as a lab would like to add some of our additional work, our additional efficiencies and automation. Just like Andrew, we have our own client. We just simply start, which means we contact the server. We will announce to the server that we would like to have a module, or we have a module that we would like to get through certification. This module is registered. It contains a number of information about that module, which will, as Chris already mentioned, lead us to will lead the server to a set of TEs that the server knows will be applicable to the respective certification. We will see here at this point a slight little waiting time. I'd like to mention it looks everything that this is now automated here, but exactly at that step later on the NIST side will add a manual intervention step. So basically you register your module, NIST humans will pick it up, will review that the registration is appropriate, and then will advance it so that we can move forward. Obviously, for the sake of demo, there is no human sitting on the NIST side. It is just automatically being granted. And here, that is now the automation part, or the automated granting, which means we have registered our work or our request with the server, and actually we are now happy to proceed with our work. So the next step is, from our point of view, from the validation point of view, we have to fill in our TEs, we provide the evidence. I'm just doing that with a simple copy command, and sorry, that's not it. No, that's not it. So here we go. Have 88, and we have, so this copy command is basically the real work, and think of that, instead of copying, you do your real work. And actually at that step, we plan to add our automation. That means instead of, here you see just copying JSON over in some target directory, but here instead we have to fill in, the tester has to fill in work, but we can also automatically fill in now JSON because it's machine parsable data. You can combine it with the information you got from ACVP, you can combine it with ESV, you can add additional automation tool that integrates, for example, test logs and test assessments and things like that. So this is exactly the step for us as a lab to add more automation to make our life easier, and especially for vendors, of course, also faster. So since we have now done all our work, so we completed our assessment, I have not shown that to you, but we also completed and filled in all the JSON data for the security policy. We will now submit everything. And this command for us just simply submits it, and it submits first the TE data as well as the respective JSON data for the security policy. The server will then process it, and Andrew's demo has shown it what the server will do, and again, I'm not focusing on that one since you have seen it. And again, I'll just like to explain to you what we are doing on our side. So we have submitted the security policy in JSON. The server is assessing it also with technical means to verify that the contents is appropriate. And the good thing is now, since the server is rendering and creating that PDF, the security policy PDF, they all look basically identical. That's the goal, apart from just some pictures and some logos. But the general idea is that they all look alike, and which allows also certifiers, NIST, but also vendors that review it to easily consume and adopt it. With that, I hope the server has now created our security policy, and we will simply try to fetch it, and we'll also see what kind of status that server has. And simply, we have downloaded our PDF, and we also, since it is this is done automatically here for the demo, we have been awarded with a certificate. But obviously, this in the final version, this is not going to be fully automated. But again, that will be a human step. A reviewer from NIST will come in, review it, and only after everything has been completed and reviewed from the NIST side, basically that certificate we just see here has been automatically granted will actually be granted after the NIST has completed the review. That said, I would like to hand over to my colleague Walker, who will show you and discuss with you a few matters regarding the security policy that just has been downloaded.
Thank you, Stefan. So here is the security policy that has been generated. Those of you that have any history writing these will recognize the format. One giant help that this tool has brought is currently any of these text boxes like this, we fill out as testers through the SP templates, which have to be loaded into the mod verified tool to be combined with the module.json that the web cryptic BR1 version spits out. And that is what formats the tables into one continuous Word doc file. What we've done here is manage to take all of that information and codify it into JSON so that we now have the text boxes and the tables in one place that is totally cross-platform, meaning that removes the bottleneck of having to move to a Windows machine to use that mod verify tool, as well as to use the Word doc that the SP template comes in, because that has some proprietary formatting that LibreOffice can't deal with. If you've worked on the JSON side of any of those web cryptic files, you'll recognize this as the formatting of those tables. And back to the SP just to see what that looks like. This is the, yep, ports and interfaces. So this is going to make at least my life a heck of a lot easier. And the cross-platform nature of it means you can edit this now anywhere you want. If you crave punishment, you could even do it on a T9 on a flip phone. So the convenience there just funnels this into a programmatic fashion that is much more streamlined for us. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm going to see if I can pull back up our slides here. Stefan, I might need your assistance.
Okay, sorry. Yes. There you go. Is that it?
Yep. Okay, so kicking to the end here. So that concludes our demo. I would love to open it up to questions. Of course, the team here has dedicated some time. Oh, Chris has some final words here.
One moment before questions. We would like to welcome participants to this project. In the bottom left here sorry, it's inverted on the screen, but on the bottom left is, or I guess right if you're looking at it, sorry, is an email that you can use if you're interested in participating in the project. We definitely want to encourage people, especially people that are interested in looking at test requirements and TEs and determining applicable and appropriate tests for those TEs to reach out. But we're welcoming participation on this project now.
Awesome, yeah, and actually to add to that, on the other side is our documentation and the website publication. So please do read up on this program. It provides a lot more detail, and you can really dive into what we covered today. So really appreciate your time, and thank you. Well, let's talk questions now. Let's go with this individual here.
Hello. Is this on? Do I need to turn this on? No. I've got a number of questions, but I'll take my time with them. Is my understanding correct that the vision at the moment is that this is a parallel tool to Web Cryptic, rather that this is going to be an alternative backend to Web Cryptic with the future, and that seems to be, slightly flawed as a starting point?
Right. So Web Cryptic is a front end. Web Cryptic really sets up data to be processed by our internal system, and so this would be a drop-in for the internal system, not a replacement of Web Cryptic. We're hopeful to, over the next year, work on integration with Web Cryptic so that a lot of the JSON formats that we've talked about can come from those forms. Nobody wants to sit down and write a ton of JSON, so using tools to help with that is definitely a goal for us.
Yeah, it just seemed, so I guess as a back-end tool, it seemed that if you had the metadata to create profiles of requirements and TEs and things like that, that would be the ideal thing to sit behind Web Cryptic and drive that as a front end.
Sorry, I'm a little trouble hearing that.
Can you repeat that?
Sorry, it just seemed that the opportunity was there. I think you will get there in the end. And if you've got all the metadata to create profiles of requirements, then that would seem to be the thing to drive Web Cryptic from, to make sure that you only had the things to enter that you needed to enter.
Right.
Okay.
Speakers face out.
Yeah, if you wanted to, we'll talk offline if we a little more on that one.
Sorry.
If we need to weigh in on detail, no problem. Question. Let's go. Are you good? Okay. How about you over here?
All right. I was wondering if you've given any thought to, once all the security policy information is entirely encapsulated in machine-readable JSON, has there been any thought into whether or not that machine-readable format might also be made available through the website or some interface for people who would like to?
So we would be interested in making the tool itself available, because it's not as useful to just keep that to ourselves. It would be helpful for the labs to know what they're submitting is going to look like. Right now it's a Python tool, 3.12. There might be some changes that are necessary to it to help adapt some areas of it, but long-term goal is to make that available.
Okay, because I was thinking even beyond the labs, there might be like government agencies that would want to pull that down and then run it through their certification auditing thing to see if the security policies for their modules do it. People who might want to run statistics on it. So it would be nicer if you didn't have to go through a full authentication thing to pull down the machine-readable security policy. But anyway.
Oh, you mean access the JSON itself?
Yes.
Okay.
After the security policy PDF has been generated, can the JSON still be left available somehow on the validated modules?
I don't see why not. It's the same content. It's not like there's any access, in any proprietary information in that JSON itself. So potentially, yeah, I don't see why not. That would be something we would set up, after. Sure. Because that's more of a CSRC thing than a CMVP thing, if that makes sense. But yeah. I don't see why not. It's an interesting idea.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Question again. Yep.
Second thought. So with a different hat on, I'm involved in the editing team for both 19790 and 24759, where recently we've gone through what turned out to be a huge effort to regenerate all the Word documents from XML source. Hearing that you've gone through the effort to go through and classify and add metadata to each of the TEs, and thinking towards the transition to future versions of 19790, it would be very interesting to understand all that metadata sooner rather than later, with a view to potentially before the XML for the future version of 19790 becoming made available, that potentially we could build some of that metadata into those files so that it's something that could be available for you rather than something that you have to generate separately yourself as a scheme.
Right.
So, placeholder for future discussions.
Okay.
To speak to that, actually, we have a blog post, or if you follow this link at the bottom left, it'll take you through some links, and we do have the TE classification as well as the JSON TE tables format of that, if you want to take a closer look at our parsing and filtering data at the JSON level.
I think the only thing on that is we list the name of the TE and not the actual content of the TE, because that's a ISO document.
Right.
Yeah, I think the hope would be that some of the constraints around access to like the TE wording could be reduced in the future, similar to what's happened with 15408, where that's still a work in progress with regards to how the content in different formats from 15408 could be released. Trying to use the model that's been established within the CCUF and CC and how that works, and playing that back across to 19790 and FIPS.
Okay, great. And next one.
Yeah, so I had a question about the process for the submission. So initially you said that the submission would let you know when everything was accepted, but then the back end, the reviewer would go on and do the reviews. Is the overall expectation that eventually all the communication would come through the AMVP? So basically the back and forth for the comments would be received, a notification would be sent by email, you would pull requests for the comments would come down through here, you would upload the response, everything would go there, and outside of the box submission process and the, what is it, the CMVP email that we have to send? That.
So we're looking at that. You know, from this project, we don't necessarily make decisions for the CMVP. We, you know, investigate the tooling and you know, make a suggestion. And so that's something we'll be looking at. You know, does it make sense to do everything through an API? Does it make sense to maintain some systems like Box? You know, we haven't committed in one direction or the other yet. So we welcome feedback. If anybody has any thoughts on that, definitely join the group, and we're welcome to talk about it.
Yeah, I can feed it back to them. Thanks.
Okay, great. Yes.
Okay, so if I'm understanding things right, I think I'm very encouraged with what I see. What I see is a system that I do not see any missing technology to make it work, or any missing approvals to make it work. So am I correct in assuming that it will be fairly soon that people will be able to use this system, labs at least will be able to use this system to submit validations?
So
that's my first sort of comment.
That's a great question. I did not talk about specific dates during the future timeline. The goal of this project is to wrap up around September of 2025, because that's when we thought ICMC 2025 was going to be. At which point we will look at what we have, prepare all of our documentation. The documentation will be published through the NCCOE that describes the full conclusions that we've reached on the technology and tooling. We will provide this back to the CMVP. It's very helpful that the CMVP is working on this, because the goal there is that what we bring back can be incorporated as quickly as possible. Now, I don't have a good idea on how long that would take, especially if that coincides with a FIPS 140-4 or something more exciting along those lines. So I can't, unfortunately, provide we plan on allowing you through the door on this date, but my best guess is late 2025, 2026.
So, and my other question, comment is, with great work always comes the request for more information, or more features. And the one feature that hit me as a vendor, not as a lab, is when I do a submission to my vendor, it'd be nice if I had an ID that I logged in and I could track which TEs have been submitted by the lab, how many comments have the labs responded to, and what's the oldest comment, so I can get an idea of where my validation is. So I mean, obviously you're not going to do that in September. I'd rather you have the system running, but that would be the next level of things I'd like to see.
That's a very interesting idea, allowing vendors to have not a say in the process, but an eye on allowed to keep an eye on the process. There are some rules around NIST that we would have to set that up carefully. I can envision it being something akin to the MIP list or the IUT list instead of direct access to an API, but there are avenues there for that data to be made available. Not that I'm committing the CMVP to doing that, I'm just saying it's a possibility.
Noted, I did say number of comments, not what the comments are. I presume
Right,
I
right.
still have to talk to my lab to figure out what the comments are.
Right.
Yeah, on that note, just putting my product manager hat on and hearing you weigh in, if you could capture that, either submit it in our feedback or we have a GitHub as well, right, Chris?
Yeah, so the
Something you
GitHub
can-
is related to the NIST pages. NIST pages come from GitHub. So the repository is ACMVP docs. That is open for issues if people have questions or comments or feature suggestions. I believe the GitHub is linked from the QR code, but I might be wrong on that. If you just search the end stub there, ACMVP docs, it will come up. So.
Yeah, so we really welcome this feedback, as building out that feature request is something that supports us with further automation and improvement. So thank you.
When do I have something I can put in my CI and say, okay, it's an OpenSL-based thing, and here's all the tests that are passing, and here's the stuff, here's when they change, and we no longer have the evidence, we need to go further and develop it, so that I have the confidence when I submit that it's going to go through, that I can catch the things that break it early on, rather than, oh, gee, we've submitted, and whoops, we have gone back to this old version and have to fix a bunch of things.
All right, so I think I could try to answer that question. I think what I'm hearing is kind of getting your module in a position where you can verify that it meets the requirements before you maybe even submit it for testing, or maybe even submit it to the CMVP, or the lab submits it to the CMVP. And I think, from the current sort of scope that we're looking at here, I mean, those conversations have been had at times, trying to figure out sort of the logistics of, or even the feasibility of something to that degree. But we're doing baby steps in a sense. We're starting with things that are very practical, very feasible, and very achievable in the sense of classifying the TEs, filtering them, understanding sort of what the TEs are looking for, and then getting better test methods, what's the expected test methods for those TEs, and then kind of working in steps. So I think that's I think that phase of the work would not be in the sort of near term future.
Yeah, and I mean, we are working, right? So like you see, we have a proof of concept where we're continuing to develop. So like Alex said, eventually we'll get there with that, with more and more that we can provide, right? So just want to elaborate. Next question.
So I know everyone is excited about this and wants this ASAP, but any transition makes me nervous, even for the right reason, right? So can you talk about any proof of concepts we are doing with labs, with different labs, or and what kind of projects we are picking? Like, I mean, these were like demo projects, right? Are we picking modules which are validated and then take those and again go through this process?
So the scope of the project right now is to focus on software level 1 modules coming through the CMVP, and we do have a lot of labs participating on the project that are, thinking in that context in terms of making sure that you can submit a, FIPS level 1 software module through this system. I don't know if any of the labs here want to talk that a little bit.
I think it'll be good to have me coming from hardware side to also get a hardware module, because it's usually maybe have more corner cases, coming up. So, thank you.
Perhaps from the lab view side, I would, for the moment, I would envision to get the first step through. That means that a large majority of modules that are currently waiting in the queue or that are currently being validated are being covered by that. And let's face it, for the moment, a large majority or a large part is software level 1. What our recommendation from the labs side would be, let's get through that one, the first step, and then let's focus then on the second step once the first step is over. But I think we have to go step by step, unfortunately, because it's new.
Hi, I was thinking a little bit more and wondering if the development roadmap includes any attempts to tease out applicable IGs or parts of IGs and feed those to the lab.
So I don't believe our TE table right now addresses IGs, but that is definitely an extension of this work that will need to be completed before we make this live.
Okay.
Those are all applicable requirements. But
And
I think we've demonstrated that the format works, and I think that's the key takeaway.
And I guess my follow-up, sort of more structural question is the way you're asking, like the module registration questionnaire, extensible to new questions to help identify the applicable TEs in the future? So do you have enough flexibility in there right now to do that?
Yeah. It's a list of 30 yes or no questions. Certainly more questions can be added to it as TEs are kept. So we took Walker's TE tables JSON. We now store it in a database within NIST, which I think is the first time we've taken FIPS 140 requirements and put them in a machine-readable format, which is odd to say, but we have that data. We can add data to it at any point in time, add new classifications to it, any additional filters to it. Once we've demonstrated that this format works, I think it's infinitely extensible.
Yeah, the process tends to be we talk about it first, we put it into our TE classification document in plain text, and then we transfer anything we've decided over into the metadata of that TE tables JSON, and we keep a versioning on it. So it was designed from the get-go to be updatable.
Right, and Michael in the back here put together some automated tooling to take that JSON and insert it into our database. You noticed during the demo that we were only asking for about 10 to 12 TEs, and we have the potential to ask for all 500, but that's not as useful for a demo. So we, trimmed down our requirements database as an example.
Mark, this is the wrapping up of our distinguished panel. Let's give a loud applause for this. I thank you all for your interest, for your patience. You have your delayed coffee, tea break in trade-off getting more from this panel. So discussion will continue in the hallway, but please still enjoy maybe a little bit of your coffee, tea break. Thank you all very much.
Well done. There you go.